scary stories.
Last year I went out of state for my first year of college to school in India. The first week I formed many friendships, and one of those was with a boy who would end up becoming my stalker. He was fairly normal at the start, and I genuinely enjoyed his company as well as his roommates, and we became quite close. Spending a lot of time together, soon I had developed friendships with other people, and he became a part of my friend group. About a month into knowing him, I started to get a feeling that he liked me more than a friend. I still acted normal around him because I did not want to draw attention to it because the feeling wasn't mutual, and I did not want to ruin our friendship. One night, about 3 months into school, everything changed. This night, all of my friends came to my dorm room to drink before they went to a party. I had told my friends that they could drink in my room, but I did not want to go out because I was very upset by a hurricane that was hitting my town in Florida. All of my friends were supportive of this, except my soon-to-be stalker. Throughout the time he was in my room, he was making jokes about how dramatic I was being, and even when everyone else told him to stop, he wouldn't let up. Finally, everyone is ready to leave to go to the party. My stalker is the last to exit my room before going. He tells me that he cares about me and that if I change my mind and decide to go out, or if I need anything, that I should text him, which I found strange given his previous behavior, but I figured he had come to his senses and was attempting to be a good friend. A couple of hours after my friends leave, I get a text from another friend telling me to come help our one friend out who is too drunk and is vomiting. So I change and walk to her building. Upon arriving, I find out she is fine now and that they put her into her bed. I go outside of their building and cry about what's happening at my home on the steps by myself. I get a text from my stalker asking if I had changed my mind. In that moment, I was sad, and I figured if I went out with them and drank, maybe I would feel better. I tell him where I am and ask if the group wants to meet up. He says that they will come, but arrives alone. He suggests we hang out in my room, but I told him I want to go to see the group. He didn't seem to be too happy with this, but I call one of my other friends to see where they are, and we go to another dorm building where they are drinking. When we get inside, we have a hard time figuring out which room they are on and what floor they are in. My stalker is visibly drunk at this point and pushes me into one of the connecting suites that is vacant. He begins to make fun of me again for being upset and is very touchy. I push him off of me and tell him to stop. We finally find one of our friends, and that friend tells us that we can meet him in his room and he has alcohol there. My stranger suggests that we go to his room instead because he's in a fight with one of the other guys and does not want to see him. I believe this, and I agree. When we get to his room, we are greeted by his roommate and a bunch of his roommate's friends. My stalker grabs my backpack with his alcohol and says we should go to my room and our friend group can meet up with us, so we do. My dorm had 2 beds in it, and my stalker sits down on one of them I sleep on, so I decide to sit on the other one. He puts on a movie, and everything is normal at first. I immediately begin texting my one friend, whose room everyone was in, and tell him to bring our friends over to my room. My friends were all drunk at this point, and everyone I texted wasn't making sense. My stalker then gets into the same bed as me and lays beside me. I immediately feel uncomfortable and start rapidly texting my friends and tell them he is acting strange and that they need to come now. He sees I'm on the phone a lot, so my stalker grabs my phone from me and tells me I need to take a 10-minute break from the phone. During this point, he becomes very touchy and suggests we try this trick with my jewel where he exhales into my mouth, to which I reject. I tell him it has been 10 minutes and that he needs to give me my phone back, but he denies knowing what I am talking about. I stand up and move to the other bed because I feel uncomfortable. He gets up and moves as well. I sit at the very end of the bed opposite of him and demand my phone. He continues to play dumb. Instead, he moves closer to me and tries to playfully touch me. I've had enough at this point and tell him that he needs to give me my phone right now, and that it isn't funny anymore. He tells me he needs to go to the bathroom. While he's in the bathroom, I grab my laptop and I iMessage one of my friends to come to my room ASAP and to tell them that he is being very creepy and I need their help. Once he returns, he tells me right away that he wants to level with me and that he thinks that we should hook up. I had been making it very clear the entire time that I did not want that, and I thought that he would be able to read my body language in this situation and realize I was very clearly uncomfortable. I tell him no and that I just want to be friends and not ruin the friendship. He doesn't listen. He comes over to me and starts playfully grabbing me, and when I push him off and tell him to stop, he pushes me down onto the bed and tries to come over me. He grabs my legs and pulls me into him. I was thankfully sober and was able to kick him away from me, and I get up and run into the hallway. He doesn't leave my room and begins to insult me and tell me he never wanted to be my friend and only wanted to sleep with me, and that guys and girls can never be friends. It always has to lead to something more. He then says that he would never date me and that I'm too emotionally unstable for him, and a slew of other insults. One thing that he said that especially scares me is that he was raised to take whatever he wants, no matter what, when defending his actions. I did not know what to do and I just started yelling and crying at him to leave my room. He refuses and then makes fun of me for crying. At this point, he still has my phone and won't give it back or leave. I threaten to call the campus police on him if he does not leave, and he finally agrees. After that night, he texted me every day for a week trying to talk to me, and one of my friends told him to listen to what he had to say, so I do. He ended up confessing his love for me and told me that he still thinks we cannot just be friends, even after I said multiple times that that is all we could ever be, and ultimately told him I think that we need to stop talking. All of my other friends knew what had happened and dropped him as well. He spent months trying to talk to me and became completely obsessed. I would still hang out with his roommates, but I would only go to their room when he wasn't there. On the few occasions where he would come in, and he would later text me paragraphs about how immature I was being for ignoring him. Finally, I said we could try to be civil and just be acquaintances to be nice, but that led to him getting very mad at me for still acting uncomfortable around him and never wanting to hang out with him. At this point, every time I would see him, he would blow up my phone and text me nonstop about being fake towards him and that I needed to get over myself. I finally blocked him. After doing this, he got very angry. He would show up where I was all of the time and just stare at me. His roommates would tell me that he talked about me every night basically for the rest of the school year. He would try to ask them things about what I was doing and who I was hooking up with. He would go up to my close girlfriends all of the time and ask what he could do to fix things with me. He tried to fight a guy who expressed he was interested in taking me out on a date. A few months ago, after the incident, he made up an excuse to come to my door almost every day. He started trying to talk to me in the hallways. He would offer me his things and even bought me a Christmas present. The last few months of school, he told his roommate that his goal was to sleep with me before graduation and that he thinks I want him, and I am just playing games with him. I in no way want him or make it seem as if I want him. The only way I act towards him is completely disgusted. Even over the summer, he has been texting his roommates about me. All of my friends tell me that he is stalking me and recognize that the way I am acting is in no way asking for his attention. I go back to school in the middle of August, and he will be there. He will be living in a frat next year, so I don't have to worry about him being on my floor, but he still worries me. I think something is very wrong with him emotionally or mentally, and not just because of the way he's acted towards me, just in general. I don't want anything to happen to myself or anyone else, and I think I should do something about it. Looking back on that night, I would say his behavior and the things he said were very rapey, and that the people who think if I want something I should take it no matter what are at a higher risk to sexually assault someone. I play a lot of online games, and throughout the years I have met weird ones, but this one takes the cake. Jake was recording for Twitch and got into a game with me and my friend Shay. We had won the match and played more. He seemed cool, so I sent him a friend request and we played more after that. He seemed very nice, if not timid. It wasn't too long after we started talking more. He confessed to being a sick kid and getting a Make-A-Wish from it. I felt bad and confessed I was also a sick kid, and still sick now, but not to that level. And it felt nice to talk to someone who understands chronic illness. Because of mine, I started playing online less, and didn't think too much of it. I got back on, and my message box was filled by Jake. I talked to him about it, and he claimed to be worried, and I told him not to worry because I had family and my boyfriend helping me when things got bad. As soon as I mentioned my boyfriend, he started getting passive aggressive and saying things like, "A good boyfriend could take that pain away, you know." I brushed it off because my friend circle was kind of small and didn't want to lose anyone for small things. Less than a week after, he finds out he was in the hospital for suicide, and he called me from the hospital, which normally is understandable, but I had never given him my phone number. When I asked, he mulled over the question and went on how he couldn't live without me and could treat me better than my boyfriend. I asked again, but he continued how he was scared to be kept there, and how if I told him I'd be there, he would get better. In that moment, I promised I would be honest if he was honest on how he got my number. As you can imagine, that got him to talk. He had back searched my username through Google and found my Tumblr because I had used the same name, then found my Facebook, then my mother's, and got my full name and looked it up, getting my number along with my address. I was stunned and hung up, blocking the number he'd called me with. I blocked him through everything but Facebook because I never knew his real name. All I can say is that I hope we never meet again.
So this happened in 2000, when I was like 13 or 14, but my aunt only told me the full story recently, and it's absolutely terrifying. When I was a teenager, my favorite aunt used to pick me up after school to babysit her 3 boys while she went to work part-time. She'd recently separated from her husband, so I was helping out pretty much every day at this point. We had a routine. We'd eat dinner and play in the yard until the sun went down, but one day she told me not to take the boys out at all. She then launched into this whole safety lecture, and I thought it was weird. Fast forward about a week, and I come over one day to a security company installing an alarm system in the house. My aunt tells me to come in the kitchen. She tells me that for weeks she's been finding cigarette butts and food wrappers in the bushes, and that she heard a cough in the bushes, so she went outside to investigate. She found a guy squatting there, face pressed against the window, and proceeded to lose her shit. He snarled at her and said,
"Bitch, I'm not looking at you. I'm looking for that pretty babysitter of yours,"
before running off. She called the police, but they didn't catch him, and kept patrolling the neighborhood for a while after. Eventually she calmed down, and things returned to normal. We were allowed to play in the yard again after a few weeks, and I forgot all about it. Last week the story came up at a family barbecue, and my aunt got really quiet and pale. She said that there was more to the story, and since I'm 30 now, I should probably hear the rest. It turns out, a guy matching the description she had given the cops was arrested about a week later for assaulting a teenage girl in an apartment complex 1 block from her house. It's terrifying to think this piece of shit excuse for a human had been watching me for who knows how long, and what he was planning to do, and what he did to someone else.
15 years ago, I had the misfortune of meeting Dave. I was new to riding the bus, and when my first day came, I hopped on and took a seat towards the front. I didn't happen to know anyone on the route and sat by myself with headphones in, rocking some now classic Good Charlotte. Back then, I didn't get much attention from the opposite sex, but I could feel eyes burning into the back of my head. I turned a couple of times to look behind me, and that's when I saw Dave. He had light eyes, brown curly hair, and quickly looked away every time I caught him staring. This went on for about a week before he finally said something to me. He told me I had nice hair, and he liked my band t-shirts. He asked right off the bat if I would be his girlfriend. I said absolutely not. I did not even know him, and his creepy staring made me so uncomfortable. He brushed past my quick no and told me there was a newly instituted hug toll that needed to be paid before getting on and off of the bus. I stared at him as he blocked the center aisle and gave him a half-hearted, one-armed hug. I know. Why would you hug the guy when you felt like he was a creep? Well, I had pointed him out to a few people in school, and everyone I talked to said that he was the nicest person they had ever met, and just a bit of an odd duck. Back then, I was worried about hurting everyone's feelings or being seen as rude, so I went with it. I have brothers on the spectrum, maybe he was too. Next thing I know, Dave had joined my photography classes. My after-school programs, I saw him around every corner, and in every hallway of the school. He started popping up from behind things to try and hug and tickle me. Meanwhile, everyone just kept going with the chorus of, "He's a super sweet guy," and just an odd duck bullshit. When I found out he was telling people I was his girlfriend, I knew I needed to put my foot down. It was around this time I became unwilling to pay the hug toll and feed his delusions. That's when things really took a turn. Suddenly, anonymous notes were popping up in my locker. Most of the notes said always and nothing else. Some had longer declarations of love, but the always ones got me the most. The simplicity of the message gave me chills. Always. I knew it. I knew it had to be Dave. My suspicions were confirmed when pictures of me began showing up along with the notes. The pictures were all taken from a slight distance and clearly without my knowledge. They were black and white and developed on the same type of paper we used in photo class. I knew it had to be Dave. Who else would be doing this? I finally got scared one Saturday afternoon as I was watching TV in my bed. I heard Dave's voice next to my bedroom window. He said he watched me walk home one day to see where I lived and wanted to stop by for a visit. He said he knew I wouldn't let him in, so he just figured he'd just stop by my window to talk. How he knew which window was mine was a thought that chilled me even more. The way this was escalating, I knew I needed to get an adult involved. My mom thought I was exaggerating. He was just young and infatuated and hormonal, according to her. She acknowledged the notes and the pictures as weird, but nothing other than some serious infatuation. So I went to an instructor at the school I knew and laid it all out on the table. Mr. K had also had Dave as a student and noticed some of his quirks and obsessive behavior and didn't doubt my story for a moment. He spoke to Dave's guidance counselor, and they both sat down with Dave, and I assumed told him he was making me uncomfortable and to stop. This pissed Dave right off. He stormed up to me in the lobby of the school with a glass rose in his hand and threw it at the wall behind me. It shattered, and he screamed in my face about how I had broken his heart, just like the rose. A few teachers broke up the situation. A few days later, he dropped out of school, and I went 8 years without seeing Dave. 8 years later, I was craving some mac and cheese, as one does, and hit up a popular spot in town to grab some to go. I looked behind the counter, and there's Dave. I had no idea he was working there and debated leaving for a moment. I decided to stay in line to get my food. High school was so long ago. I hadn't heard from him since that day in the lobby. Surely this guy could not still have this obsession with me. It was a huge relief when another register opened and a young woman could take my order. I wondered if maybe he was even mortified and didn't want to interact with me, and had her open. Wrong again. He seemed to take my visit to his work as a sign that I was ready to love him. At least, that's what I've been told since. I got a friend request from him that night and immediately deleted the request. A few nights later, I'm getting home and walking across the street when I see that someone is standing on the side of my house, opposite the door, in the shadows. I haul ass into the house, lock everything, and watch. It's so dark out. But I turn on the lamppost out front and hope to God I was just imagining things. Then I see him. He slinks from the side of the house, trying to stay in the shadows, and runs across the street and towards the house he grew up in. Unfortunately for him, I saw his stupid curly brown hair. I called the police and reported this, but of course, there wasn't much they could do. There was no proof he hadn't approached me or tried to get in. It couldn't be proven it was him. They did agree to keep someone on lookout in the area, and I saw police patrolling more than usual the following nights. Eventually the police patrol died down, and that's when the late night knocking began. I could hear it softly on windows and occasionally on the door, but never dared to answer or get close enough to look. It wasn't every night, maybe 2 or 3 nights a week. The police never seemed to be close enough in the area when it happened to catch him. A couple of weeks after the knocking began, I received an envelope wedged into my screen door. It was full of the creepy, candid pictures from high school, and another note that said always. I had enough and didn't know what to do. I went out to my car to drive everything down to the police. I don't care if I couldn't prove it was him. I just wanted to have some official record of what was happening to me. That's when I saw the word always carved into my back bumper. I lost it, breaking down in heavy sobs as I drove to the police station. Again, all they could do was take a report. But I decided on another course of action. In my rage, I took a picture of the police station sign and of the report being filed. I sent them to Dave over Facebook Messenger. I told him to leave me the hell alone, that the police were involved and he didn't want to ruin his life this way. He simply responded, "You're right," and disappeared. I have since heard he stalked a widow shortly after her husband had died, pounding on her windows and doors, trying to break in, until she screamed out of a top window that she was calling the police. I can only begin to imagine how she felt trying to grieve her husband and deal with Dave's obsessive ways. You may now find yourself wondering if the mac and cheese was worth it. The answer is no. Dave, let's not meet again.
This happened about 12 years ago. I was 14. My sister was 16. We were traveling with my parents and stopped at a motel right inside the Kentucky state line. It was across the road from a shopping center. Knowing there were a few hours of daylight, we asked my parents if we could go check out the stores. Being in a place that we had never been made them hesitate. But it was right there. We were pretty protective of each other already, and it's the middle of the day business shopping center. We were there for a while, 10 minutes before we decided it sucked and headed back to the room. Once we reached the parking lot, we went behind the first building, knowing our room was behind the other side of the second building. Planned on immediately going behind both buildings at once, but there were a lot of cars leaving at once, and it was the easiest way to get out of the way. A truck passed and dropped someone off at his room. There might have been conversation, but we weren't paying attention. The truck started driving super slow when it had sped into the lot before. Okay, maybe he saw people walking and decided to slow down. I noticed, but it didn't send up any red flags. We walked about 50 feet and he's still driving slow, still behind us. A red flag starts waving in my mind. I peek over to my sister, and yeah, she looks a bit concerned.
We picked up the pace just a bit, knowing we were still a few hundred feet and around the building from our room. He starts saying something like, "Hey, my buddy wants to know if you guys want to party." While he was talking, we both looked back at each other, saw the guy in the truck looking right at us, and his friend walking about halfway to us from his room. Sister cut off "Nope," and took off running, reached the room and slammed into it. Dad opened it right as the truck tore out behind us, jumbled through what happened to my parents, never seen my dad so freaked out. Called the cops, they checked the cameras and got the license plate number. Cops took our number, said they'd tell us if they caught him. They caught him a week or so later on unrelated charges. I think he got 5 years for everything.